Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Monday, June 30th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 562 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. And today we've got some NFL breaking news to discuss that directly impacts the New York Jets. And I also want to get into a topic on what it seems to be a forgotten New York Jet who potentially could play a bigger role than many expect here coming up in the 2025 season. We'll break that down later on, but we'll start today by discussing the Blockbuster trade between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Miami Dolphins and how it impacts the New York Jets. As always, though, before we begin, we've got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. If you want to get in on any of the sports betting action, check out BetUS and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. If you want any of the hottest tickets in sports or entertainment, check out SeatGeek and use code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. And, of course, our friends over at Huga House. If you want any of their awesome selection of hats, T-shirts, sweatshirts, you name it, check them out and use code BUBS for 15% off any purchase and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 562. Thank you, as always, for joining me here on a Monday program, the last episode of June. Tomorrow is July 1st. Training camp will begin that month, so football is right around the corner. Cannot wait. We'll have you covered here, of course, all the way through. Today, though, we got to get into some breaking, shocking, blockbuster NFL news that came out of the AFC North and the AFC East with a trade between the Steelers and the Dolphins. We'll throw up the trade details here on the screen, and many Jet fans, myself included, this has a direct impact on the New York Jets here. So here are the full trade details of today's blockbuster. The Steelers received cornerback Jalen Ramsey, tight end Jonnu Smith, and a 2027 7th-round pick. And the Dolphins receive safety Minkah Fitzpatrick, so he returns to Miami, and a 2027 5th-round pick. This is the rare player-for-player trade in the NFL. You don't often see players for players getting traded. It's, of course, oftentimes players for picks or however, these teams play it out. But that's not the case with this one. Of course, with Ramsey, Jonnu Smith going to Pittsburgh, and the Dolphins getting Minkah Fitzpatrick. Very interesting move from many different angles. And I would throw this out here just beginning here, kind of the way this impacts the Jets here is, number one, the Steelers face, obviously, the Jets here in week number 1. And then from the Dolphins' perspective, you're talking about a team here in Miami who in some areas got worse after this trade. In some areas still have roster questions after this trade. A team coming off of a very disappointing 2024 campaign, who the Jets will, of course, face twice a year here in your division rival. This was a trade that I think we all expected, at least not necessarily to Pittsburgh, but for a while there, it was viewed that Jalen Ramsey was going to get dealt. It was only a matter of when not if. With the way the contract was playing in Miami, we knew that was going to happen. Everything else in this deal, though, comes as a surprise, and it's not often you see this caliber of a deal happen this late into the offseason and more so this close to training camp. I look at this trade personally, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people are trying to pick winners and trying to pick losers from this trade, and I'm not viewing this trade as you can't, there's certain trades, in my opinion, that you really don't know if it's a winner or a loser until a couple years down the road. That's not one of these trades. I personally don't think there is an overarching winner or really an overarching loser in this deal. I think both of these teams, you can kind of look at the trade as a positive and a negative at the same time, or at least not enough of a needle mover, let's say, for Pittsburgh. And from a Miami perspective, while you do get back really the best player that was in this trade, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's still playing at a pretty high level, you now created two massive holes. Not that Jalen Ramsey was a stud. He's not the same player, of course, he once was, but you now have a ton of questions at cornerback, and you did move on from one of your better offensive weapons last year in Jonnu Smith, and you have a ton of questions now at tight end. So I don't really view this trade really as an overarching big winner, big loser. You look at Ramsey now going to Pittsburgh, not the same player he once was, and the Jets' impact here is entering 10th season. The Jets will now get him week number 1. I think you look at Jalen Ramsey, who now has to learn a new defense on the fly. I get he's a veteran. I get all that. He'll pick it up. But this was a team that cooked Jalen Ramsey last year. 10 of 13 last season for 197 yards against Ramsey. Garrett Wilson specifically, 7 of 9 for 137 yards and for 6 first downs. He had 7 of the team's 10 receptions against Ramsey. He also had 137 of the team's 197 yards, along with those 6 first downs. Ramsey's clearly not the same player. Garrett Wilson had success against him last year. He now gets a shot week number 1 to go against him as Ramsey enters his 10th season. And you hope that Fields and Garrett Wilson connection can connect right away. Ramsey, 30 years old. Yeah, he's a 3-time first-team All-Pro. Yeah, he's a 7-time Pro Bowler, but not the same player anymore. And from the Pittsburgh perspective, this is a team that is now, we're very familiar to this, Jet fans. They are pushing all their chips in the center for an all-in with Aaron Rodgers, right? We also got the comments the other day from Rodgers that this looks like this could be his last season. You really don't know what to believe with Rodgers, right? For years now, every offseason, it's been questions around him. But if this is it, they're pushing all their chips in the center, and they're doing it very similar to the way they did it with the Jets, which went up in flames, and that is getting a bunch of older players who are past their prime, and they're going off of more of what they've done, not what they're going to do. And the reason I bring that up is you now look at that Steelers cornerback room. It's a prime opportunity, I think, for the Jets to potentially have some success there in week 1. Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey is your 1-2 punch at corner. Darius Slay is nowhere near the player he once was. He is 34 years old, and Jalen Ramsey is 30. He'll be 31 in October. And Aaron Rodgers, 41. The average age between those 3 guys is 35. That's old. That's old. Not the same players. So the Pittsburgh angle, the Ramsey thing, old secondary, it's more the names in that secondary, not so much the production currently. And then you throw the Jonnu Smith factor into it, entering 9th season. To be honest, to me, from the Miami perspective, Jonnu Smith's a little interesting. And I know, of course, the money was a little bit of a factor, and it seemed like he did, kind of quietly want out of Miami to get more money elsewhere. And he does get a raise here. I believe it's about a 1 year, $12 million, I think, raise or contract extension there from Pittsburgh. So does get a bit of raise entering 9th season. Coming off a career year, though, 88 receptions, 884 yards, 8 touchdowns. Jets actually did have some struggles last year against Jonnu Smith. He had a career high in yards, receptions, and touchdowns, and was 4th among tight ends and receptions, 3rd in tight ends amongst yards, and tied for 2nd in tight ends among touchdowns. Quietly put together a top 5 season for a tight end last year in those areas. And he'll now pair with Pat Freiermuth. The only question is with Jonnu Smith. Miami's perspective, you need a lot of help at tight end. And in the Packers' perspective, we've seen it the last year with Rodgers. even throughout his career, he doesn't use the tight ends much. So how does that factor into the whole thing? Do they use the tight ends more in Pittsburgh? With the lack of receivers behind DK Metcalf, certainly possible. Maybe that's what they view here. Either way, though, that's kind of the Pittsburgh perspective, Jets week 1 opponent. Now, the Dolphins side of thing, I think, is interesting because I think a lot of people look at the Dolphins as the winners of this trade, right? They get rid of Jalen Ramsey, who didn't want to be there. That was clear. And you were initially looking at moving on from Jalen Ramsey and not really getting anything for him, just kind of a cap dump. And you're able to get Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is the best player, feels like, in this trade. Still playing at a solid level. Is he the player maybe he was 2 years ago? Not that elite, not the best safety in football anymore, but still a solid player. Entering his 8th season, 28 will be 29, so still south of 30. And he's a 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first-team All-Pro, and he's made the Pro Bowl the last 3 seasons. So he's still playing at a high level. He now returned to Miami, of course, where he spent the first year and a half of his career before being dealt to Pittsburgh. The Dolphins angle is you get a starting safety, which they did need, and he essentially replaces former Jet Ashton Davis. So the Ashton Davis Jets connections continue here, right? And you initially thought moving on from Ramsey, you wouldn't get much back. You get Minkah Fitzpatrick, essentially. The thing with Miami, though, is, and again, why I don't see this as an overarching Steelers win, Dolphins win, is, you get Minkah Fitzpatrick, okay, but they didn't do a ton in the offseason. They've now lost all their team captains from last year. And you look at the 2 rooms, Ramsey moves on. You look at that cornerback room now. Cam Smith, Storm Duck, Kader Kohu, Ethan Boner, Artie Burns, Jason Marshall, Kendall Sheffield, Isaiah Johnson, Ethan Robinson, BJ Adams. Jason Marshall's a 5th-round rookie. BJ Adams, UDFA. Ethan Robinson, UDFA. Bunch of young unknowns. Now, Kader Kohu, nickel, best guy. He's proven himself. But other than that, questions. And then you look at the Dolphins tight end room, ton of questions. Faroa Brown, Julian Hill, Tanner Connor, and Jalen Conyers, UDFA. Faroa Brown's the only guy out of those other 4 names that has caught an NFL touchdown. Only one. So, and moving on from Jonnu Smith, while I feel like quietly did one out, he was one of your better offensive weapons last year, considering the year that a guy Tyreek Hill had, who, of course, was a down year for his standards. So, you get Minkah Fitzpatrick, but okay, Ramsey's not the same player he once was, but what's your plan now at corner? You have to have a plan. You should have a plan because you knew Ramsey wasn't going to be there for a while, but that cornerback room's terrible. And tight end room as well. And this is a team in the Jets division. I don't think it's crazy right now. You look at this Dolphins roster to say the Jets can challenge them and finish ahead of them this year. I really don't think that's crazy. This is a Dolphins team that is in a weird spot where they're kind of retooling at the same time of being into his prime. They're in a weird spot. How long does McDaniel last through all of this? Are they planning on winning this year? Is there pressure on them to win? Because if there is, they're not really making winning moves. They're a very weird spot. They've kind of plateaued and have gotten worse, really, over the last calendar year, which continues here. Still so many questions. So Pittsburgh, they're in old age home right now, trying to hope that they can get a little bit out of these guys before they sail off into the sunset. The Jalen Ramseys, the Darius Slays, the Aaron Rodgers. We saw the Jets try to do that. It failed. And Miami now, we knew this for a while, but especially now, massive questions at corner, massive questions at safe or tight end. And I mean, questions elsewhere as well. The offensive line we know has been a problem. So I don't look at this as, I think this is from the Jets angle, team in the AFC East that is on the downward spiral. And a Pittsburgh angle, they got Jonnu Smith. How much is Rodgers going to actually target the tight ends? That's not something he does a ton of. Week 1, what does that offense look like? And they face Jalen Ramsey week 1, and that's a guy that Garrett Wilson has had success against. And if he can do that and get open for Fields, you hope you can have some success there. So that's the way I view this blockbuster trade, as the Jets, of course, will face both of these teams total of 3 times this year, twice, of course, Miami, and then the opener against Pittsburgh at home. So that's the blockbuster. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Been very interesting to see the reactions of everybody. I think everybody's a little bit, to be honest, in shock. I was, certainly. We knew Ramsey, again, was getting dealt, but it was Minka Fitzpatrick, Jonnu Smith, all these other pieces. That did not feel like it was coming, and it certainly did. NFL, it's why it's king. You never know. So that's that. Now, I want to move on here to a forgotten, underrated, however you want to label him, New York Jet offseason acquisition that Ethan Greenberg on the New York Jets podcast the other day with Eric Allen discussed as kind of a sleeper and somebody to watch. So I want to play the clip first, and then we'll discuss it. Here was Greenberg on Andrew Beck, the fullback, and his potential role in the offense in 2025.
And I don't think this guy that I'm about to mention is listed at tight end, but, Andrew Beck, the fullback, I think he's been getting pretty active here in the spring as well, and some of which has come from the tight end spot. And, I think that Andrew Beck is – I don't know if the Jets will carry a fullback, obviously. Neither of us do, but Andrew Beck is someone who has a lot of experience in the league, and, I wouldn't sleep on him entering training camp because – sure, there is Jeremy Ruckert, there's Mason Taylor, to your point, there's Stone Smart, there's Zach Kuntz, there's Neil Johnson. I think Beck is very much in the mix there as well because he has experience as a pass catcher, as a fullback. He also, in Houston, he had a kickoff return touchdown. Someone tried to squib it, he got it, and he ran it back.
Hey, the more you can do.
Exactly.
And
team's experience as
well.
Special
teams is going to be an emphasis.
Now, I will have to say this, right? We know we've hit the dead part of the offseason. We're breaking down what a fullback can do for this New York Jets offense. But it is an interesting note, all jokes aside. It is interesting because Andrew Beck was actually the first move of the Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn regime this offseason. They signed him to a reserve futures contract back in February. And an interesting note as well, Beck comes in 29 years old, has spent time in the league with a couple different teams. Overall, has spent 6 years in the league, but spent 4 of them with Denver. 2019 to 2022 was with Denver and crossed paths with Darren Muji. And then 2023 was with Houston and spent last year split between Houston and Green Bay, only playing in 4 games. But an interesting note there is, of course, the Muji connection, first signing there to that reserve future contract. And they mentioned Beck, right, potentially fitting in here as a tight end fullback. He listed as a fullback, but you look at that end of that tight end room. Can he break through? Ruckert's got to prove more. Stone Smart got some receiving upside, but still has a lot of work to do. Zach Kuntz has really done borderline nothing since coming in as a UDFA in 2023. Could Beck break through there? Who knows? Or he mentioned the receiving aspect of things. In his career, 25 receptions for 214 yards, 3 touchdowns. And he also mentioned the returning. He did have that one kick return, 85 yards for a touchdown, which is interesting. So a little bit of do-it-all guy. Has played some fullback, has also seen some time at tight end. Typical fullback, right? Can receive a bit, more of your blocker, has had some rushing opportunities. Not many, but has had a few, 8 in his career. What I think is interesting about Andrew Beck is the way this New York Jets offense is headed with the run-first approach. It is certainly possible when you look back at what Detroit was able to do, right, and where Tanner Engstrand is coming from, the tight end is something that they used and something that potentially could be implemented here to the New York Jets. I also look at, right, Baltimore, and I've said this many times. The New York Jets offense could mirror similar the structure of it. I have to always clear this up. Not the success and the level of efficiency that Baltimore runs at, right? Lamar and Derrick Henry, that's not going to be Breece Hall and Justin Fields. It'd be great, but that's not realistic expectations. But what Baltimore does in terms of that run-heavy approach, a lot of those read options, you have a quarterback that can run. You, of course, have a very good running back. That's what you're kind of expecting. And Baltimore has a fullback that is very good, one of the better ones in the NFL, one of the only fullbacks that NFL fans can name in Patrick Ricard, who has been there since 2017, 9 years, now north of 30, has spent a while. And the reason I bring that up is they're a run-first heavy team. Detroit, over the last couple of years with Engstrand, has had a lot of success on the ground, and they have actually used a fullback. Now, the Jets side of things, they used a fullback in 2023 with Nick Bawden, who played 13% of the team's offensive snaps in 16 games that year. He had that one touchdown, remember, in that terrible rainy game against New England where the Jets lost to fall to 1-2 on the year at that awful rainy game at MetLife, as we all remember, another Zach Wilson no-show for that offense. Nick Bawden that year was the fullback. Now, last year, they didn't really use a fullback. It was a mix of Solomon Thomas. We also saw Jeremy Ruckert used a little bit more. But the Detroit angle is interesting because during Engstrand's time in Detroit, which was 2020 up until last year, in 46 games between 2020 and 2023, Jason Cabinda was the team's fullback who actually took over for Nick Bawden prior to, his role with the Jets a couple years down the line. So they did use a fullback during that time. He appeared in 46 games across those couple of seasons. Baltimore has used the fullback. The reason I bring that up is their offensive structure, their run-heavy approach. The Jets have talked a lot about the physicality, the nastiness, toughness, all those things. If they're going to be that downhill, beat you in the trenches, run first team, a fullback could play a role in that offense. Not a massive role, but could be out there, could make this roster, could be somebody to look at as somebody to make this 53-man and potentially take a spot from somebody else. I think that's one of the biggest things. And when you look at Beck, he originally entered the league as a tight end, but shifted to the fullback role. And in 2023, 16 games played, had 184 snaps in the backfield and 109 snaps as inline tight end. So played a mix of that, right? A little bit of tight end blocking, also fullback as well. Just somebody to look for. And I think especially when you look at the identity on this New York Jets offense, what it's going to be is a run, right? That run first team. You go with the heavy personnel packages. Beck could see a role on this team. He's got the connection with Muji. Engstrand is familiar with having a fullback from his days in Detroit. Baltimore, which the Jets could run a similar style of scheme, have had fullback success. So it's somebody to keep an eye on. That's the biggest thing. I don't want to sit here and put Andrew Beck on this pedestal. Oh, he's going to be the best fullback in the NFL. No, there's no guarantee he makes the roster. But it's somebody to keep an eye on. And you think about the role he could play, it certainly makes sense as to why he is a name to watch and why he's somebody that obviously Ethan Greenberg is mentioning there as somebody that could play a role in this offense that not many people really see coming. And we talk about it a lot. When you look at the back end of that tight end room, it's questions, very many questions, a lot. If they feel Beck as a blocking perspective and, the jumbo packages or not more so jumbo, but more so the heavy personnel packages can play a bigger role or can play a more important role than a Kuntz or a Stone Smart, he can land on this team and get a roster spot and play a role. So that's Andrew Beck. I wanted to mention that because I thought that was interesting. And I thought it is something that to keep an eye on as we enter training camp because you connect the dots and it could make sense as to where he could find a spot on this team. So that'll do it. Another episode in the books. Appreciate you all, as always, for tuning in. What are your thoughts on the Steelers-Dolphins trade and the impact it has on the New York Jets? And your thoughts on Andrew Beck. Does he play a role in this team? Does he make the roster? Your thoughts on him, the fullback, the first signing of the Darren Muji era back in February. What do you think about him entering training camp as well? Let me know down below. Appreciate you all. As always, stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. Until next time, JETS. Jets, Jets, Jets.